Before we get into this video, I want to say thank you to everybody who liked and commented on the last video. It was awesome seeing a bunch of people talk about Assassin's Creed Rogue and their perspectives on it. It was also nice seeing other people agree with me that, yeah, the North Atlantic was extremely weird, eerie, and creepy. I said at the end of that video that I would make a more in-depth analysis on the North Atlantic in Assassin's Creed Rogue if the video got some views. I told myself if that video got about 1,500 views, I would start working on about an hour, 2 hour long video for it. And it looks like we're pushing like 2.1 by the time I'm recording this, so it's coming. It'll take a little bit of time, but I will get all of my thoughts collected so it can be a little bit more in depth rather than like an 8 minute slop fest. I still really don't know where this channel direction is going to go. I know I'm going to make a bunch more Assassin's Creed videos, especially the ones that I played a lot of growing up. I know that I'd like to explore and discuss a bunch of different video games, and I think that would be extremely fun for me. But for in terms of the Assassin's Creed videos, I'm going to keep recording a few of them that I've got in the chamber. I'll make sure to get them all into a playlist. And in the meantime, please comment things that you want to see, anything that interests you, criticisms that you might have. I want to do stuff that gives me a purpose on this channel, and I think if I can cater towards as many people and what they are wanting to see that I also enjoy, I think the better. Okay, let's get into the video now. Jesus. So recently I've been playing Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered on PC. I bought the game about 2 or 3 weeks back. I haven't played Assassin's Creed 3 since I think literally 2014 was the last time that I touched the game. And I'm pretty confused around the game's plot. Like, I'm aware that as Connor, you're helping the Patriots fight against the British and fight for independence, and the British and Americans are being influenced by a bunch of different Templar agents, and your goal is to bring down your father's right that he established in North America, and it's just blah, 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 blah. All of that's pretty cut and dry. I mean, I can follow that clean as day. There's no confusion there. The confusion for me comes at Connor's deeply rooted vendetta against Charles Lee. Like, I don't understand why he hates Charles Lee to the capacity in which he does, where he's only fueled by wanting to kill him. Okay, obviously, for the first half of the game, I can understand why. The perception is that Connor is choked out by Charles Lee, and then the Templars proceed to go and burn the village. But, as we all know, spoiler alert, by the way, in case you haven't played it, it was actually George Washington during the French and Indian War who destroyed the village. So then that in my mind, expunges the majority of the hateful feelings that Connor should have towards Charles. Obviously, Connor's dislike of Charles Lee can still remain because of the fact that he talked down to him and choked him out, and basically bullied him in front of all of his Templar cronies at the beginning of the game. But the realization that Washington and the British soldiers were the ones who burnt down the village absolves a lot of what you consider to be the evil characteristics in Charles Lee. The confusion around my perception of Connor's hatred towards Charles Lee is also influenced by the Forsaken novelization, which I suggest anybody should read. It follows Haytham Kenway's journal entries. It's not all of its canon. I actually think that most of it retconned a lot of itself, but it's a good read nonetheless and gives you a little bit more of an in-depth perspective. The novelization itself doesn't talk about Charles Lee as much as I think it probably should have, considering how much of a cornerstone he was in the plot. But in the times where he is discussed, it doesn't do much to paint him in the light of some mega ultra lord villain. Charles is often described as sulking, especially during the Revolutionary War. The majority of the plot in Forsaken around this time that discusses Charles Lee shows him not reacting well to the fact that Washington was named the leader of the Continental Army, which that is true in real life. We'll talk about that here in a second. But it doesn't do much rather than show that he's an arrogant, insecure individual. And in the game, outside of what you perceive as Charles Lee and the Templars burning down your village, you don't see much in the game that points towards Charles Lee being a bloodthirsty monster. And this is in comparison to the other members of the Order that you are hunting down in Assassin's Creed 3. Hickey attempts to assassinate George Washington. John Pitcairn literally starts the Revolutionary War in this game. Haytham, who is supposed to be a beacon of reasoning and maybe makes you feel a little bit closer to the Templars, is extremely brutal and almost never saves any prisoners. William Johnson, while trying not to subjugate the Native Americans, uses force to try to convince them and strong arm them into selling signaling away their rights and property. Benjamin Church straight up steals supplies from the revolutionaries at Valley Forge, leaving countless to starve and die from the lack of supplies in the camp itself, all while betraying the Order. Like, in comparison to the other people in the Order itself, he actually seems like the most chill one. Now, playing as Connor, you obviously know that Charles Lee's loyalties do duly remain with the Templar Order, and you can assume that his work with the Continental Army is probably for something that the Templars need or want, or to put them in a position of advantage. But the only thing he really does that has any capacity of effect on the Continentals is the retreat at Monmouth, which makes no sense in-game as it did in real life. Obviously, in-game, his motivations were to try to make Washington look awful and to give the British a victory at the Battle of Monmouth, which, as we know, didn't happen. But the only thing that really came out of it was his court-martialing, which didn't lead to much of a severe punishment, and he kind of just was able to focus more time working with the Templars, which, if we pair that with the Forsaken novelization, I don't think that's what he was wanting to do at all. I don't think he was interested in working with the Templars very much during the war. He was just very pissed at Washington. I mean, I'm not making that up. Literally, you need to read the book. He's just so mad. I know that the popular perspective on Charles Lee is that he's villainous, and that's understandable. He is a Templar, and of course Templars in nature are a little bit more authoritarian than the Assassins. However, I think the word that could be best used to describe Charles Lee is ambiguous, and this is modeled largely after who Charles Lee was in the real world. Like in Assassin's Creed 3, the real Charles Lee was extremely devastated that he was passed up on for leader of the Continental Army. And his reaction is kind of valid. I mean, he was technically more experienced than Washington, and he probably could have led the men in some capacity, although I don't think as successful as Washington, obviously. His retreat at Monmouth was really irrational, and historically we don't really know why he did it. A lot of people theorize that he was a British spy or a British turncoat. We don't really know. I'm pretty sure that it basically just sums up to cowardice is what they assume in the court-martialing, which also did happen, by the way. But most people of the time and shortly after viewed Charles Lee largely ambiguous. A lot of people thought one way, a lot of people thought another way, but you could never really describe who he was as an individual. And I think if you attempt to shed the narrative that is established in Assassin's Creed and look at it from a middle ground perspective, you'll see that Charles Lee is largely the same way in the game. You can't really describe him, and you can have opinions on him one way or the other, but at the same time, there is no singular narrative that describes who he is as an individual. In terms of flaws that would make him extremely villainous, in-game we can see that he is a little bit of a hot-headed individual, and his temper is very difficult to control. We also see firsthand his cowardice, his ignorance, and his arrogance. But in a lot of these characteristics, Connor is the same, albeit there's a lack of cowardice and arrogance, but those other traits are easily applicable to Connor. I mean, just pull up at any point in time, Connor's screaming, "Give me Charles Lee," or Connor literally running across the Battle of Bunker Hill to kill John Pitcairn because his patience was not going to wait for the perfect opportunity. And Connor's ignorance towards seeing what the Patriots' intentions were to indigenous and minority populations after the war blinded him. And it was almost like to him it was a shock to see that these things were going to happen and remain institutionalized. Even if early in the game Samuel Adams says, well, we're gonna make every man created equal, but we can't really get to the African Americans just yet. That's coming though, don't worry, part 2. But I really think that if you look at these things from as much of an unbiased perspective as you can without being in one camp or the other, you'll see that there isn't really a good foundation for him to be the central piece villain of the game. I think this is where Ubisoft sort of did some in-game manipulation to make up for the fact that the foundation itself was kind of weak for him being the main villain. See, once you start playing as Connor, there are some major changes to the appearance of Charles Lee. When you're playing as Hatham, Charles Lee is kind of just a big-eyed and bushy-tailed individual who really wants to be involved in the Templar Order and secrecy. And as you play as Connor, obviously that still remains true, as he is the second in command of the Colonial Rot and is pretty invested into the politics of the Templar Order. However, they did some massive overhauls to the way he looked. First off is the balding, which obviously for most men you're gonna get male pattern baldness. It's just a fact of life. Get used to wearing hats now. But the balding is paired with the fact that overall he looks largely gross and undone. He never looks like he's put together in any capacity. Even when you see him in the Congress, I can smell him through my screen. And I think Ubisoft absolutely did this intentionally. And I think for most people, this toggles the idea of chaos. When we look at Charles Lee, we feel chaotic. We feel that there is a sense of something not right, something that's unhinged. And so that helps establish this villainous idea that we have for him. I think Ubisoft definitely could have written him a little bit better in the sense of giving him more villainistic characteristics or taking a little bit more liberty at expanding upon what makes him the bad guy in the first place. Where there is so much ambiguity in who he is as a person in the real world, there is a lot of room to expand upon. And a good example of how Charles Lee is written to be the bad guy with absolutely no question about it is in the TV show Turn, which I would recommend. It just came out on Netflix. Pretty good. But early in the show, it establishes pretty quickly on that he's a spy. He's a British spy who's being manipulated to target Washington because he's also jealous that he wasn't the leader of the Continental Army. And when he retreats from the Battle of Monmouth, it's because he had already pre-decided with the British officers that he was going to. And you have a lot more to chew on there. It doesn't mean it has to be true, and I think historically accurate things are important, but I think in a video game as of this caliber, it's not extremely necessary. And I think they could have taken a little bit more liberty at not leaving him so in the middle. But still, Connor believes deep down in his heart that Charles Lee is a monster. And outside of his cowardice at the Battle of Monmouth, there isn't anything really tied to him that directly involves him with the Templar Order. And on top of this, there's nothing he does that would be considered ruthless other than bullying, which is childish. So I don't know that even after taking away the things that we assume Charles Lee is, Connor still feels that he is of the worst of the Templar Order. If anything, the only thing that I can even assume, and this is all my opinion, of course, I don't know, is that Charles Lee is extremely devoted to the Templar Order, in the game at least. And Forsaken, he's obviously a little distant as he's sulking. Literally not joking. You definitely need to read. It's crazy. But I have to assume that Connor views him as the perfect definition of what a Templar is and how corrupt and villainous they can be because Charles is so devoted to the Order. I think he views Charles as someone who believes that authoritarianism over the colonies is a necessity. But I just don't know if that's good enough to go on for him being the centerpiece. If he was just a regular character who you hunted down on your way to hunt down Hatham, I think it would be a lot more understandable. But to put him at the precipice of what it means to be a bad guy, it just doesn't have any traction for me. There's nothing I can bite my teeth into that has me feeling a sense of personal satisfaction for hunting down Charles Lee and getting ever closer to doing so. And I think even my little 10-year-old self would agree. But obviously that's just my opinion. And I hope that this video doesn't dictate for you what you feel towards the game and the way you perceive Charles Lee as a bad guy in itself. That's never my intention. If anything, this video really is just for me to ask, why do I feel this way? If there's anything that I'm missing or something I overlooked, please don't hesitate to comment. I want anybody who watches really to comment their opinions and perspectives, maybe some facts about the game I didn't know that could influence my perception on Charles Lee. I think it would be so great. I enjoyed reading all of the comments on the last video, getting your perspectives. A lot of people liked the area of the North Atlantic, a lot of people didn't. But please comment. I love every opinion I get, and yeah. I'll see you guys here in a few days for another video. Appreciate it.